What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic?
Why can't women become priests?
1-833-288-EWTN.
I don't understand why I have to earn salvation.
1-833-288-3986.
What's stopping you?
Why do I need to confess my sins to a priest?
What's stopping you? This is Called to Communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Well, a tremendous Thursday to each and every one of you, and do not adjust your radio dial. I am not Tom Price with a new voice. It's Jack Williams sitting in today for Tom, who's a little bit under the weather. I'm sure that he would appreciate everybody keeping him in your prayers today, and pray for his lovely wife, Adrienne, who I'm sure has to take care of him, and there's probably, if I know Tom, there's a little bit of duress involved in that. Tom doesn't like to be done for as much as he likes to do for others, so keep both of them, Adrienne and Tom Price, in your prayers today. This is Called to Communion, our show dedicated to those of you who are not yet a member of the Catholic faith. If you've got a question about Holy Mother Church, or if you'd like to answer our question, what's stopping you from becoming a Catholic, we'd love to hear from you. The number's 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. If you're outside the United States and Canada, your number is 1-205-271-2985, and we will put you straight to the front of the line at 1-205-271-2985. You can always send us an email, ctc@ewtn.com, or you can text your question to Dr. Anders. He's a 21st century kind of theologian or historian or whatever he calls himself these days. Text the letters EWTN to 55000. Wait for a response. Text your first name and your question, message, and data rates may apply. I'm Jack Williams, as I said, sitting in for Tom Price. Michael Birchfield produces the program. Your call screener, I think, is Rich Jesse. And Michael McCall is probably handling our social media endeavors. So if you're watching us on Facebook Live or YouTube, type a question into that chat window, and it may find its way to us during the course of the hour. Dr. Anders, how are you?
How about roving radio catechist?
Okay, we'll go with that. The other ones fit, though, to one degree or another.
Sure.
Yeah, they do. I have to, we were chatting and you were perusing the internet. You always, people who follow you get a kick out of the fact that you have 77 tabs open on your browser every time you get away from the computer. But you were reading a little news headline, and you have to share it with our listeners.
Man sues his parents for having him.
Without consent.
Without consent, exactly.
Oy vey. We're in a bit
the Catholic Church actually put the idea of legal consent on the book, so to speak, in Western jurisprudence, and in particular with regard to the doctrine of marriage, because in the ancient Roman world, women were property, and they married whoever their parents said they should marry. They didn't have a choice in the matter. And the Catholic Church said, no, actually, a woman can refuse to give her consent to marry, and she can consecrate her virginity to God, and that's an even more admirable thing, which didn't win a lot of kudos from the pagans for the Catholics, but it did give us some virgin martyrs like Lucy, Agnes, Agatha, and so forth. And so it was, Catholics were the first feminists who said women should have free choice. But you can go too far with the free choice business and consent. And I think this fellow did.
I'm glad no one explained that to my wife before we got married. We've got an email here from an anonymous listener who says, why, if you and your wife hated each other so much, why then didn't the two of you just divorce? You weren't Catholic, and if you say God hates divorce, it's also an Old Testament teaching that the one thing God really despises are a married couple that hates each other, and you even said your own wife told you she hates you.
Yeah,
it's a very
right.
Poignant question
Thank
to
you.
ask you today with your
so,
lovely and talented wife, Jill, sitting in the studio with us.
So we probably ought to explain for people who don't know. This is someone who's obviously read my book.
That's right.
I wrote a book called The Catholic Church Saved My Marriage, and it begins with the memorable line, I hate you, Jill said. And Jill's actually sitting here right with me now. She no longer hates me, guys. We made up. It's good. It's all good. It's all good. And but I actually have a pretty lengthy discussion in the text about why I never contemplated divorce. So one of them was one of the greatest gifts that my parents ever gave me. They were not Catholics. They did give me my faith in God, faith in Holy Scripture, faith in Jesus. But they also gave me a great faith in the solidity, the inviolability, permanence of holy marriage. And, my father was a corporate lawyer. He told me three things in life. Only 3 lectures I ever got from my dad. They were study the liberal arts, don't divorce your wife, and never co-sign a loan. All right.
Really?
So far, I've did all of those, got that. Check, check, check. All right. But my dad was not a Bible verse quoting kind of guy. He wasn't, your kind of John 3:16 Baptist. Yeah. But he did quote one verse, and that was the text of Malachi: God hates divorce. But it wasn't just a prescription. It wasn't just a taboo in my life. I came to appreciate by my early 20s that there were a lot of things in life that might have brought instability in my life, mostly my own bad moral choices, anxieties and stresses and so forth, depression, whatever. But one thing that I never doubted was that my parents were there for one another and for me. And I realized that in all the vicissitudes of life and in all my own mistakes and screw-ups and bad things I had done or things that I had suffered, I could always count on there being a family there for me. And that the foundation of that was my parents' marriage, their rock-solid commitment to one another. Many times people would come to my dad because he was an attorney. He wasn't a family attorney, but he just gave good advice. And they would say, his name's Louis. They'd say, Louis, I'm thinking of leaving my wife. And he would say, can't do it, immoral, go to hell. I mean, it was like categorical, no qualification. And, people sometimes say, well, I don't love my spouse anymore. That happened to Bertrand Russell, the atheist philosopher. Mm-hmm. He tells us he was out riding his bike one day, realized he didn't love his wife, went home and left her, or went home and divorced her. And the right answer, of course, if somebody comes to you and says, well, I don't love my wife anymore. Well, start loving your wife. Right? Start loving your wife. You've put the cart is now before the horse. You've got the idea backwards. Yeah. And I had that conviction rock solid in my soul, and I recognized that I love my children. My wife loved my children, and whatever it might cost me personally to be in a difficult relationship, I didn't want to do that to my kids, and I couldn't face myself. I didn't want to go to my grave with the shame of having broken a marriage. But I didn't have the tools to put it together. I didn't have the tools to fix it until I became a Catholic.
Yeah, beautiful. I had much the same experience growing up. There was never, divorce was never an option. We did
burn your parachute.
My father did not state it in such exacting terms, but the thought never crossed my mind that it was ever a possibility. And, I think of my lovely late wife, Susie, and I think one of the strengths of our marriage was that we both entered that marriage and we knew that divorce was not an option. And it makes it so much easier with that understanding to actually work through your problems.
Exactly. I knew a Protestant pastor who would say, don't come for me to counseling unless you've burned your parachute. And I love that. That's beautiful.
Beautiful. 833-288-EWTN is our toll-free number, 833-288-3986. Call to communion with Dr. David Anders. (833-288-EWTN) is our toll-free number. That's 833-288-3986. A couple of lines open for you. Our leadoff hitter today is Kathy in Akron, Ohio, listening to EWTN on 1260 The Rock. Kathy, you are on with Dr. David Anders.
Hi, how are you?
Oh, doing great, thanks. How about you?
I'm fine, thank you, and I thank you for taking my call. I have a couple quick questions, and I can just hang up and listen to the answers. But I was wondering if there's any type of book that could be used as an evangelization tool that would have the Mass, as an example, the Mass on one page, each section of the Mass, and then on the other page an explanation of what we're doing, why we do it, where we got that information, where we got that particular liturgy, or how, the part of the Mass of why we do that during the Mass. And it would be a booklet that would include the whole Mass. I was wondering if there's any type of book that, if you wanted to invite a Protestant to Mass, you would have that book as a tool. Say, okay, this is what's going on. They could use it, and they could kind of read it over and get some info. And then the other question I have is: there is a book that has comparative religions like Catholicism, and then columns of other religions where you could compare Catholic teaching to what other religions teach? So those are the two questions I had, and I don't know if there's such books like that, but if there's not, I think somebody should write one.
How about you, Kathy? You need to make like a car dealership brochure with columns that we can comparison shop. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So not shop. We know what we want to buy. We just want everybody to understand what we have in the marketplace here as a Catholic. So anyway, I will hang up and I will let you tackle those calls so you can get to other people. Thank you very much, and God bless you all.
Okay, thanks, Kathy. I really appreciate the question. So in terms of a book where you would have a kind of point-by-point commentary and explanation of the Mass that would function evangelistically, there is a new book published by Sophia Institute Press that has gotten a lot of traction, called A Devotional Journey into the Mass, How Mass Can Become a Time of Grace, Nourishment, and Devotion, by Christopher Carstens. I have to confess I haven't read the text, but I've glanced at it, and I trust the publisher for the very good reason that they brought my book to press, so must have some halfway decent judgment in the selection of Catholic literature. No, I'm just teasing. They really are good folks at Sophia, and I know it's been a big success, had a lot of readership, and has been promoted through this network as well. So that's one that I would look at. There are 10,000 books on the Mass. If you want a much older treatment, but one it's not exactly what you're looking for in terms of a line-by-line commentary, but a good history of the Mass and why we do what we do that's written for lay people in an accessible format, is the book The Mass, A Study in the Roman Liturgy by Adrian Fortescue. And that's one that I have read. And what that's going to do is ground you in the history of the Mass, starting in the text of the New Testament and then showing you the organic development of the Roman Rite out of those New Testament antecedents. But again, it's just a few hundred pages, and it's written for the layperson, not for the professional theologian. So that's Adrian Fortescue's book, The Mass, A Study in Roman Liturgy. When it comes to a kind of side-by-side comparison of Catholicism with the various world religions, there certainly are books that treat Catholicism in conversation with different religious traditions, and one that does so in conversation with Protestantism, especially evangelical Protestantism, is Carl Keating's book, Catholicism and Fundamentalism, which I highly recommend. And then there are individual texts I can think of that would treat Catholicism in conversation with Islam and or Buddhism. One that it just kind of from a sort of Orthodox standpoint, believing in the divine authority of the Catholic Church, that's kind of a line-by-line commentary. One's not coming off the top of my head, and that's a topic that I've investigated myself quite a bit. I'm a kind of a lay student of world religions. I enjoy thinking and talking about them, and I've written about them, but not in the format you suggest. I'll have to put my mind to that a little bit more.
Thanks so much, Kathy. We appreciate that phone call. The number to be on the program is 833-288-EWTN.
You know what? Let me do say this. There's a podcast. It's not a text, but there's a podcast that may give you some of what you're looking for there. The Institute for Catholic Culture out of the Diocese of Arlington has hundreds and hundreds of hours of audio doing just this kind of analysis, and I know some of the work they've done on Islam, for example, has been very helpful to a lot of Catholics. That might be a good resource for you to look at also.
Beautiful. Register Radio with Jeanette DeMello and Matthew Bunson, Saturday, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and again Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, right here on EWTN Radio. This week on the Register Radio, they talk to Catholic News Agency Rome correspondent Hannah Brockhouse, and then Register contributor Monsignor Charles Pope. He'll weigh in on the scandal swirling around the monstrous abortion bill in New York and everything going on in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Keep them in your prayers. Also, a recap of Pope Francis's visit to the United Arab Emirates in a historic trip to the Saudi Arabian Peninsula. It's all on Register Radio, Saturday, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, Sunday, 11 a.m. Eastern Time, right here on EWTN Radio. Next up is Ricardo in Amarillo, Texas, listening to EWTN on St. Valentine Radio. Ricardo, thanks for holding. You're on with Dr. Anders.
Yes.
Go right ahead, Ricardo. What's your question?
No, I don't have a question. I have an answer.
Go right ahead.
Because on the radio is for non-Catholic, and I'm not a non-Catholic, and they say, what's stopping me to be a non-Catholic? I got two reasons, because on the Bible, Yahweh forbade to have statues, idols, and obelisks. They told Israel to knock him down, and Catholics have a lot of statues. The other part of question, I got a video here with me on my phone. A priest is singing a Lucifer song.
Well, I don't know anything about that, but I know Dr. Anders can certainly address the Deuteronomy passage for you, Ricardo.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, actually, God commanded, He commanded the people of Israel to make religious imagery and statuary for use in the Holy of Holies and the temple in their sacrificial worship of Yahweh, of God. What he forbade them to do was to worship the idols of pagan gods. He commanded the manufacture of religious artwork and imagery for use in holy worship, but forbade the worship of idols and statues to pagan gods. Now, you will find, as a matter of historical record, that the Catholic Church has always vehemently opposed, the worship of idols or the worship of foreign gods. So we're of one mind here on the book of Deuteronomy's prohibition on idolatry and the worship of foreign gods. However, we also hold with the book of Deuteronomy that it is permissible and, in fact, a good idea to create artwork as an aid to Christian worship. And that's also something that God commanded in the Old Covenant. So we want to be as biblical as possible, both forbidding idolatry and allowing the use of religious artwork.
I mean, God made our senses. It only stands to reason that there would be a holy use for them, right?
To be sure.
833-288-EWTN is our toll-free number, 833-288-3986. Next up is John in Saginaw, Michigan, listening on Ave Maria Radio. John, thanks for holding. You're on with David Anders.
Hello, Dr. Anders. Can
Hi.
you hear me?
Oh, we can hear you.
Hi there.
Hi.
I have a biblical question from the Old Testament. It's written that King David had an eye for Bersabee, who was already married, and had her husband put into a military conflict where he felt that he would lose his life, so that he would then be able to marry Bersabee. My question is, what moral responsibility did Bersabee have to her first husband, knowing eventually what had happened to him, and how could she be loyal to King David knowing that?
Okay, thanks. I appreciate the question. Well, actually, the text of sacred Scripture, obviously you're asking the question because Scripture does not address the moral responsibility of Bathsheba in David's murder and adultery. And so from the point of view of the sacred narrative, that's not where we are to direct our attention. Now, I'm not saying that we can't ask this as a purely speculative question, but the point of the biblical narrative is to lay moral responsibility on David and then see what the consequences for David's actions were, because unlike Bathsheba, David was not a private person, but had a duty, a care of the community, had a care for the common good as the monarch, as king. And of course, his failure was devastating politically, economically, socially, for the unity of Israel and for the good of the people of God. And so that's a warning to all of us who have positions of leadership, might just be leadership of our own families, to live virtuously and do what's right, because if we don't, the consequences could be grave. Now, as a speculative matter, I think interpreters have taken different points of view. You know, David first encountered Bathsheba when he saw her bathing on a rooftop. Well, you know, I've heard at least some interpreters say, what's this woman doing bathing on a rooftop, you know, when she knows she's in plain view of the king? Was she trying to elicit his interest, right? In which case, such a thing would be reprehensible and she would bear grave moral responsibility. On the other hand, she could have been an unwitting victim of powerful men whom she could not resist. Now, interestingly, David's marriage to Bathsheba was valid. It was a valid marriage. She legitimately became his wife, and their child Solomon was the rightful heir to the throne of Israel. Interestingly, however, in the current code of canon law, one of the impediments to a valid marriage, an impediment is, this happens, whatever union you contract will not actually be considered by the church as a marriage. One of the impediments to a valid marriage is murdering the spouse of the man or woman you intend to marry. If you do that today in the Catholic Church, that's an impediment to a valid marriage. Cannot contract a valid marriage with the spouse of somebody that you've murdered. So, you know, David was not held to the standards of modern canonical legislation, but if he were to pull that trick today, he wouldn't have a valid marriage.
Unbelievable. 833-288-EWTN is our toll-free number. We have a text here from David in Louisiana. He said, I'm a member of a labor union that donates to a political entity that supports abortion. If I continue to pay my union dues, am I complicit in these movements or sinful in the eyes of the church?
Okay, so if you pay your union dues and your union dues are used to support abortions, then you are materially cooperating with abortion. You are materially cooperating with abortion. That doesn't follow that you're formally cooperating with abortion. And Catholic moral theologians who have to parse these kinds of distinctions draw this one. Formal cooperation is when you intend the end that is being accomplished. So, you know, if you're a nurse assisting an abortion doctor and he says, you know, hand me the scalpel, and you do so, I mean, you are intending that this doctor complete the procedure and murder the child. That's formal cooperation. That is never allowable. If you are, let's say you work in the surgical supply company that manufactures the scalpel, and your intent is just to make good surgical instruments, and you're kind of indifferent into the use to which they're put. That's not your specific goal. The fact that you materially cooperated, you provided matter that was pertinent to the completion of the procedure, doesn't necessarily make you complicit in the completed abortion, because that's not what you were aiming at, and your cooperation is pretty remote. Your material cooperation can be proximate or remote. It can be proximate, you know, that's you're the surgical supply company guy, and you happen to be at the abortion clinic on the day the procedure is being performed, and the abortion doctor says, you know, I need to buy a new scalpel, like right now. Okay, well, you're standing right there. You know what's going on. That's proximate material cooperation, and you can't plead, well, you know, I'm just trying to make a buck. Proximate, I mean, remote is, you know, you're the guy working on the factory floor. So what we have to look at in a situation like this, you don't have formal cooperation. You do have material. How remote? How remote? Well, it's pretty remote. It's pretty remote cooperation. I'm not going to tell you that you shouldn't try to direct your union dues elsewhere, but I would say it's not a slam dunk case that you're cooperating in a proximate way, in a materially proximate way. It's questionable. It's certainly wrong that the union would use the dues in this way. And I would say if you can direct your dues in another direction, you ought to. You know, if your livelihood depends on membership in the union, and if you fail to pay your dues, are you going to lose your job, get kicked out, you know, put your family into hardship? Well, you know, then you might you might try to bring pressure to bear. You might try to vote your conscience. I mean, there's all kinds of ways you could try to redirect those funds without immediately cutting off the lifeline to support your family.
You know, we live in a culture here in America where it's becoming increasingly difficult to not be involved in something that doesn't have an ancillary connection to something immoral.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Exactly. I mean,
it's hard to draw the line between conscientiousness and scrupulosity.
All of us are materially cooperating in some evil, if remotely. That's true.
No way around it. 833, at least not now. 833-288-EWTN is our toll-free number. That's 833-288-3986. It's toll-free anywhere in North America. If you're outside the United States and Canada, we'd still love to hear from you. Your number is 1-205-271-2985. What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic? EWTN's Called to Communion with Dr. David Anders. 833-288-EWTN is our toll-free number, 833-288-3986. Back to the phones we go. Rebecca's in St. Petersburg, Florida, listening on the Ave Maria Radio app. Rebecca, you are on with David Anders.
Hey, Dr. David. Thank you for taking my call.
Hi, how are you?
Some girlfriends. I'm good. So my soul sisters and I were discussing today's gospel, and we were just curious. What's your take on who was sent with Judas?
You know,
when Jesus sent out the 12.
I'm going to wimp out on you. Can I go look at the text and get back to you? I want to go read the text before I just answer on the fly. You know, I hadn't got the text in front of me right now.
Right. Well, he doesn't. There's no names given. It's just when Jesus sent out the 12.
Oh, I see. I see. So who? If
when he sent them 2 by 2.
Oh, he sent them. Oh, yeah. You know,
Right.
I don't know that the text. Since text doesn't say, we're left to speculation. The only other source of information we would have would be from sacred tradition. And if I were going to go research the question, I would look at Eusebius's ecclesiastical history. I mean, Eusebius is the early church historian who gives us the most detailed information about the adventures of the apostles, so to speak.
Does that help you, Rebecca?
Oh, bad.
There you go.
I just don't know. I'm sorry.
You've got a date with Eusebius, Rebecca.
Okay.
God bless you. We appreciate the phone call. That frees up a line for you at 833-288-EWTN. That is the number that Cecilia used. She's in Livonia, Michigan, listening on Ave Maria Radio. Cecilia, you're on with Dr. David Anders.
Hi, Dr. Anders. I'm so glad I could speak with you today. I'm taking a Bible study class, and we get an article about Pelagianism. I really didn't know what it was, and I read about it, but it was kind of, I didn't understand the heresy. I know it's about original sin, but it also said that Pelagianism also, in fact, impacts the beliefs of many Catholics today regarding grace. Could you expound on that?
I sure will. Could I ask you if this Bible study is a Catholic Bible study or a Protestant Bible study?
Yes. No, it's a Catholic Bible study.
Okay.
We've been studying John, and, when we were studying about grace, and
Sure.
she gave us an article.
I understand. The reason I asked the question is that the charge of Pelagianism laid against Catholics has a different character when Protestants make that charge as compared to when Catholics make that charge. But let me explain Pelagianism. Pelagianism is the doctrine that we can fulfill the law of God without the help of grace. That's what Pelagius taught. He taught that simply in virtue of knowing the difference between right and wrong, and empowered by our own free choice, that we could perfectly fulfill the law of God. We could keep the Ten Commandments, we could keep the Sermon on the Mount, we could follow the example of Christ, simply inspired by the moral example of Jesus and our explicit knowledge of the commands. We had what was within us sufficient to keep those commands. And the Catholic position, which is not Pelagian, is that we might know the truth about God, we might know the truth about the moral law, but that we are wounded in our nature, such that we cannot perfectly fulfill the law without the help of grace. Now, when we do have grace, when we're baptized, original sin is washed away, and sanctifying grace is infused into our soul, along with all the moral virtues and the theological virtues. When we have the gift of the Holy Spirit, then it is possible for us to keep the law of God and to merit salvation, but only possible with the help of grace. And does Pelagianism still affect the thinking of some Catholics today? Well, obviously it does. In fact, Pope Francis recently wrote a document, like within the last year, when he went about condemning all the neo-Pelagians running around in the Catholic Church. And so, we always have to be on guard against this. I think one place where Pelagianism sneaks into modern Catholic discourse would be the Catholic that would say, well, my neighbor is not a Christian, not a Catholic, not baptized, not this, not that, but, they're a good person. They're a good person, so I'm sure God will save them. Well, God has a pretty elevated definition of what counts as good. And it entails loving God above all things and our neighbor as ourselves for God's sake. And so packed into God's definition of goodness is that we do what we do for the right reasons, inspired by a certain kind of knowledge of God's nature and a vision, a hope for eternity. And Christ says, for example, if you pray in public to be seen by men, got your reward in full. But if you pray in secret, your Father in heaven who sees you in secret will reward you. So the character of the act is conditioned by the quality of our interior life that produces the act. And that has to be an interior life that's renovated in charity by the gift of the Holy Spirit. Otherwise, it may have the outward character of a moral act, but it won't have that inner quality that really makes it gracious and pleasing to God. So, sometimes our desire to be ecumenical and gracious towards our neighbors may lead us to diminish the necessity of grace for living a truly holy life.
Next stop, the great state of Pennsylvania. Jeff is in Center Valley, listening on Holy Spirit Radio. Jeff, you're on with Dr. David Anders.
Good afternoon. Thank you for taking my call. My question kind of is somewhat of a follow-up, I guess, to one of the questions you took earlier, and that is involving the transgender movement. I work for a company that makes surveys of sorts for schools, and sometimes of the many questions that they want us to put on there, there'll be something that allows for options such as non-binary or something when it comes to the gender question. And I guess my question is, would it be considered sinful, I guess, for me to go ahead and put one of those questions on there if I'm making the survey for the company?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the question. So just to clarify a little bit the Church's understanding of this phenomenon, clearly gender dysphoria exists. That is, someone's internal sense of themselves is out of whack, out of harmony with their biological sex. And that creates discomfort, anxiety, depression, all kinds of pathologies that need to be treated and need to be treated compassionately and with care. And so people who experience all of the negative consequences of gender dysphoria are objects of the Church's social concern, and we love them, and we wish to help them. The fact that gender dysphoria exists is a far cry from affirming that biological sex is merely a cultural construct. And so the transgendered mania that has infected our culture is in fact not just an empirical statement about a psychological condition called gender dysphoria, but is a deeply ideological statement and philosophical statement about the nature of personal identity and how we know things and what things are, that is rife with contradiction and insanity, to be honest with you. And to illustrate, I was out with my daughter one time at a local coffee shop. My daughter is a drop-dead, beautiful, extraordinarily feminine young woman. And nobody with eyes in their head would mistake her for anything else. And we actually happened to strike up a conversation with a transgendered activist. Kind of a strange thing to do while you're waiting for a cup of coffee, but lo and behold, that's what happened. And in the course of the conversation, I pointed to my daughter, and I said, "This is a girl. She's female." And the person with whom I was speaking said, "I mean no offense, but I don't know that." Whereupon I responded, "I believe your ideology has overrun your intellect." And it has. It has. And that's clearly the problem, that the ideology has overrun what intellectually, empirically, we know to be the case. When the cattleman goes out to breed cattle, he doesn't take a poll to find out whether he's dealing with a cow or a bull. He knows what he's got. He doesn't have to ask. Okay? And it's patently obvious. So there are aspects of this agenda, this ideology, that are harmful to the human person, harmful to our sanity, and certainly harmful to the bodies of young children, especially those who have this thing foisted upon them when they are conditioned to give certain kind of answers because they manifest certain psychological traits that they will 95% of the time outgrow it when they grow older if puberty and hormones are allowed to take their proper course. So we have deep, deep reasons culturally to speak the truth to this movement in love, and ought to have grave concerns about running headlong in the acceptance of this ideology, which threatens to wreck families and wreck human bodies and wreck human souls. Now, your question is about the extent of your cooperation in a survey put out by your company of customers, and should you be complicit in the use of this language? You know, I'm sensitive to the position that you're in. So I don't want to be in the position of telling you you need to do this or you need to do that. I'm going to let your conscience work that out. I will tell you that the premise of this survey is wrong, and it's one cog in a very big machine that threatens to overrun our entire society with deep damaging effects. And we should all take a step back and consider how we can speak truth to this movement. And we certainly never want to formally cooperate with the ideological agenda. And we want to be very circumspect about our degree of material cooperation with that agenda.
833-288-EWTN is our toll-free number. That's 833-288-3986. We'll stay in the state of Pennsylvania. Hope is in Philadelphia watching us on YouTube. Hi, Hope. What's on your mind today?
Hi. Thanks so much for taking my call. So I'm not Catholic, but I've been researching it for the past year or so. And one of the main things holding me back is all of the incredible testimonies I've heard and people of God I know outside of the Catholic Church, and how to reconcile that with, one, the claim of being the one true church, and also the view of the Eucharist and the verses that say it's necessary for life.
Okay, thanks, Hope. So I have a couple of questions for you. If you were to read the testimonies of Roman soldiers who had participated in the pagan cult of Mithras, and they described their engagement in the rites and secret ceremonies of Mithras in ecstatic and moving terms, would those testimonies pose a difficulty to you in accepting the claims of the Catholic Church?
Do they pose a difficulty?
Well, if you were to read them. In other words, is it just the fact that someone has a moving religious experience outside of Catholicism, or is it the particular character of those conversion accounts that you might find in modern evangelicalism? You understand the distinction?
Not quite. Could you repeat that? I'm sorry.
Sure. So you have encountered people who have given testimonies of God's work in their life, and they're not Catholic, and you think to yourself, well, surely God's at work in these people. Look at the powerful effect. If he can work in this church, why should I bother with the Catholic Church? And the reason I framed the question as I did was because I wanted to take a pretty extreme example. I wanted to take something that was really far removed from Catholicism, like the pagan cult of Mithras. Or you take, Hinduism or some accounts of, Buddhist Mahayanists in medieval Japan. Doesn't matter. The point I'm getting at is that the capacity to experience elevated religious emotion, or moral reformation for that matter, or conversion, is something that is natural to the human person. It's not, the Catholic Church has never said that moral renovation or change of heart or change of mind or religious experience, that these kinds of things are unique to Catholicism. We find them in every culture of the world at all times. So just because someone has a moving religious experience, even a morally renovating religious experience in another tradition, that fact alone is not a sufficient reason to reject Catholicism. What we have to do is look at the character of the conversion, the character of the religious experience that someone claims outside the Catholic Church, and compare it to the character of the religious experience that one expects within the Catholic tradition. And look at the claims of the Catholic Church, what it says we're to aim for in becoming Catholics. Now, one of the things that's distinctive about the Catholic tradition is, quite frankly, the unity of faith and reason. That God created the human person, declared that the human person is good, including all of our intellectual faculties, our capacity to know truths, philosophical, scientific, moral, and otherwise, and that the Catholic faith comes and completes what is evident only implicitly within nature. So Catholicism is a great big yes to the entirety of the human experience. And many other religious traditions don't view conversion that way, don't view religious truth in that way. And so, for example, someone who has a religious experience within Buddhism may often characterize that as a rejection of his knowledge of reality or of reason or of the body or of life in civil society and see it as a kind of escape. Well, that's not a religious experience that I want to emulate. I want the Catholic religious experience, which affirms the goodness of the body, society, family, and reason. You see the point I'm getting at. Sometimes Protestants who claim moving religious experiences, the quality of that experience in retrospect is something that I might not want to emulate. And I'll give you an example. Before I was a Catholic, I had a period in my life where I was a Pentecostal. And look, I have a lot of Pentecostal friends. They do a lot of good things. I'm not trying to knock Pentecostals. But I had some moving experiences as a Pentecostal. I had a lot of elevated religious emotions. And I remember one time I was at a Pentecostal meeting. Jack, I've told you this story before. And I was, they speak in tongues, Pentecostals. And I was there speaking in tongues with them, but just hooting and hollering with the best of them, jumping up and down, having a grand old time. And I remember a fellow in front of me in this auditorium was very impressed with my display of emotion. And he turned around and he said to me, "Anders, you are filled with the Spirit of God." And in a flash, I knew he was wrong. And it was the beginning of the end of my Pentecostalism. And I thought to myself, no, that's not correct. He has mistaken my elevated emotions for a spiritual experience. And they're just elevated emotions. This is just me performing a kind of self-catharsis to try to escape my own self-loathing. It's not the same quality of experience that I would later come to know as a Catholic, when what I aimed at was not elevated emotion, but true contrition, an assessment of my sins, reconciliation with God, forgiveness of others, and a desire to be at one with this God of both reason and charity. And so the quality of the experience was very, very different as a Catholic. And I think you can't reason simply from religious experience. You have to begin at first principles. Okay? And so now let's go back to your second question, which was about the necessity of the Eucharist for salvation. We're going to go back to first principles. Right? The first principles of the Catholic faith are that we are wounded in our moral nature, that we find it difficult to know and do the good, and we need to be changed interiorly, not by an emotional experience, but by a deep transformation of the way we think, feel, and how we're motivated. And that's the promise of grace that Christ came to deliver, that he would recreate our nature after the pattern of his divine life through holy baptism. We die with Christ in baptism, are raised again with him to new life. And that the Catholic life is a working out of that new principle that we call grace, where we grow in the knowledge and love of God and neighbor. And while baptism initiates us into this life, Christ has given us sacraments, signposts along the way to nourish us, to encourage us, to teach us, and to strengthen us in that ongoing process of self-renovation that we call conversion. And the capstone of that sacramental system is the gift of his very own life, his body and blood, which he says, if you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you will have life. And so that's why the Eucharist, we call it the sacrament of sacraments, the source and summit of the whole Christian life, because it is the sacrament of our communion with Christ himself. St. Irenaeus said, what we lost in Adam, we regain in Christ, namely to be in the likeness and image of God. To have that likeness and image renewed within us, we have to feed on Christ every day. Now, I think maybe you're scrupling a bit over this question. Can someone outside the Catholic Church therefore not be saved? Is it impossible for someone outside the Church to be saved? And this is the final qualification I want to give you. The Church doesn't say that except in a kind of an extended sense. Anyone who's saved is saved through the grace of the Catholic Church. In that sense, we would say outside the Church there's no salvation. But outside the formal boundaries of the seven sacraments and the hierarchy, there are elements of the Catholic faith. That's what the Second Vatican Council said, elements of truth and sanctification. So, for example, your Protestant friends have some of the Bible. They don't have all the Bible. Some of the sacraments. They don't have all the sacraments. And by God's gracious condescension, they may acquire graces effective for their salvation that could genuinely renovate their interior lives in charity and unite them to God. Even though they don't have the whole shooting match, so to speak, they have elements that might be for them means of grace and sanctification. Well, then, you say, if I can acquire elements outside the Catholic faith, why come into full union? Well, question for you. Would you like part of the truth or the whole thing? You want some of the means of grace or all of them? You know, my Baptist granddaddy had but two sacraments, baptism and marriage. He got more grace out of those two than I get out of my seven. But I need all seven. All right? He was a better guy than I was. Think how good he would have been. If he'd had all seven, he'd been a sure enough canonized saint, right? He'd gone even farther, all right? But secondly, once I come to be persuaded of the truth of the Catholic faith, I understand this is a church founded by Christ and that he desires the visible unity of all those who believe in him. Now you add to this promise of the fullness of grace and truth the moral obligation to live at union with my conscience. Because once I'm persuaded that the Catholic faith was actually founded by Christ and that I have an obligation to join it, if I hold back, now I'm not in a safe position. Now I'm actually living at odds with my conscience. And no one needs to live at odds with their conscience.
You know, we talked to Ricardo from Amarillo, Texas earlier, and he talked about the worshiping of idols, and you pointed out so rightly that our God himself instructed the people to create images that would aid in their worship. And Mother Angelica knew this concept all too well and always encouraged people to surround themselves with holy reminders, and that was really the genesis of EWTN's religious catalog. It's grown into so much more than that. You can find Catholic books and catechetical aids. You can even find How the Catholic Church Saved My Marriage by Dr. David Anders at EWTN Religious Catalog. For complete details, visit EWTNRC.com. Buy Catholic, shop EWTNRC.com today. We're heading out of Gillette, Wyoming. Debbie is in Wyoming listening on the EWTN app. Debbie, you're on with Dr. Anders.
Hi, Dr. Anders. It's nice to talk to you.
Hey, thanks for calling.
I have a question about incrementalism with regards to abortion. I'll make this as quick as I can. I had a conversation with a Catholic friend about abortion, and they decided that pro-lifers and abortionists now are so divided and polarized there can never be a complete end to abortion. So they developed an idea that as pro-lifers we need to compromise in order to save lives. And they said, can't the pro-life community and lawmakers say, we'll never ban abortion completely, so we should find middle ground where we say, and a point where we can say abortion is okay up to a certain point. Wouldn't this be an example of doing something for the greater good? They use that term, the greater good. And it gave the example of abortion up to 4 months in the pregnancy. And I responded, of course, immediately saying, absolutely not. Life begins at conception. And this person continued to bring up points, and he says to me, how do we really know when life begins? So, they had this whole theme of incrementalism in the conversation. The conversation was quite in-depth and long, and I didn't really have good enough answers for them, something more concrete that I could say to them about how incrementalism is not a good way to approach the abortion argument.
Okay, thanks. There's a lot to say, and we only have a couple minutes left, but I'll do my best. So I understand what you're saying about incrementalism, and I think we need to really, really guard against the error of consequentialism. Now, consequentialism is saying let's do evil so that good can result. So let us say it would be evil, it would be wrong for me to sign a document or a law that had as its explicit premise that children up to the age of 4 months in the womb were not moral objects, that they were not moral objects possessing their own moral dignity and deserving of life. So that's not true. They are moral objects. They are persons. They do deserve the dignity of life. So I'm not going to be a signatory to something that affirms the opposite. That's an evil. And even if it had the effect of perhaps limiting some abortions, I'm not going to do one evil in order to accomplish another good. That's called consequentialism. The Church rules that out in her moral theology. On the other hand, the Church does affirm a principle called gradualism. Gradualism means I'll take what gains I can get as long as it doesn't require me to intend or complete an actually evil object in the attaining of it. And I like to put it this way. It's better to kill 5 people than 10. Now, it's wrong to kill 5 people. If you aim at killing 5 people, you've done something gravely wrong. But, it's like if the warlord is bearing down on my village and he says, I'm going to wipe everybody out, if I can step forward and say, well, how about wiping out me and leaving everybody else? Well, I don't want him to wipe me out, right? But I'm giving him an out, and he says, okay, I'll take the deal. Well, that's gradualism. Better to come up with a situation where fewer people die rather than more. And here comes the music. So we want to... Now, the last point, we don't really know when life begins. Well, that's poppycock. We absolutely know when life begins. And the fertilized embryo, the zygote, is a distinct human person with its own DNA signature and vital signs and circulatory and nervous and all the rest of its systems. It may be dependent on the mother, but it is a distinct human being, and the science of embryology can demonstrate that. What philosophy knows, science can prove. This is a person.
On behalf of our host, Dr. David Anders, our producer, Michael Birchfield, call screener Rich Jesse, and our social media master, Mr. Michael McCall, I'm Jack Williams. Thanks so much for tuning in. Back at it tomorrow. Until then, God bless.